I was always curious about all sorts of things, and especially things out in nature and why they were doing what they were doing. And I remember sitting out in my backyard looking at the sunlight kind of falling on the ground and thinking, isn't it cool that like we can see all the stuff around us? I wonder if there are things in life, I wonder if there are things around me that I can't see but that exist. And then come to find out, like, light itself has all these invisible parts to it. It's part of the electromagnetic spectrum. I mean, when I learned about that, I was just like, mind blown. And I had great teachers. In 6th grade, I had a great teacher too, he was a substitute teacher, and he came in for a week. And he loved NASA, and he brought in all these NASA materials. And my friend who was sitting next to me, we were always talking. We were probably not so helpful to the teacher, but in any case, he came in and we were so excited because, you know, we did all these activities with NASA, and like both of our hands just kept going up, like, you know, he was asking questions, and then you'd get a postcard from NASA, or you'd get this, and we're like, and I was just so excited. Then finally he said, you two can't answer any more questions because we were wiping out the supplies. So, which I thought was fair enough. But then I told my friend at that point, I was like, I'm going to be an astronomer, because he had just told us what an astronomer was and what they did. So I held on to that dream. So in 9th grade, I was in this career development class, and I knew I wanted to be an astronomer, or I thought I did, and no, I knew. I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so I was filling out all the bubbles, you know, taking all these competency tests, and sure enough, astronomer was actually in my little, you might be good at this. I was like, yes. But to get an A in the class, I was very ambitious. I like my A's. To get an A in the class, you had to interview people in the profession you wanted to go into. And so I called up 3 astronomers at the University of Oregon, because I grew up in Eugene, and set up interviews with them, which was terrifying because I was quite a shy individual. And the idea of like going in talking to these professors, oh my gosh. But anyways, I did it. And the first professor had this, he ran the telescope out in Eastern Oregon for the University of Oregon. And he was such a dynamic, awesome man. And he was like, oh, you want to be an astronomer? Great. And he even said, oh, we need more women in astronomy. And he said, if you want to go into astronomy, though, you should go into physics, because at the foundation of astronomy is physics. And so I was like, okay, take note, take physics. And then I went to the next astronomer, and he was a visiting astronomer from Cornell. And he was in this office, so he didn't have a lot of stuff, but he was at a desk at the end, and then he had placed a chair, I don't know, maybe 30 feet from his desk, so quite far away. And he was like, "Here, you can sit there." And I thought, okay, I'm very far away from you. And so he said, "So what brings you here? I hear you want to be an astronomer." And I said, "Well, I do, but I just talked to this other professor, and he said I should go into physics first, so that's what I'm going to do next." And he goes, "Well, I really think that I need to be honest with you and tell you that women can't do physics. And you can try, but you're going to fail, and you might not want to go that route." And I had all this support in my life for this career, and it was so strange. I just thought, why is he saying that to me? So it was nice, because I didn't think, oh, I guess I can't do physics. I just thought, what's wrong with him that he's thinking that? So I'm grateful for that, actually. And but then I felt very awkward, like, well, what else can, and then he was like, but, since you're here to talk about that, do you have any other questions? So I asked him about, well, what do you do? What kind of things do you have any recommendations for me other than not to go into physics? And I don't even remember. I think my brain turned off at that point, because clearly he was not going to support me. So I don't remember the rest of that interview at all. I just remember wanting to get out of that room as fast as possible. So then the nice thing was that he was sandwiched in between two very supportive professors. So then the next professor I went and visited, he was much more formal than the first, but he had me sit at a reasonable distance from him. And he said, well, do you like math? And I said, yeah, I really like math. I love math, actually. And he goes, oh, good. That's all I do all day is math. And I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. So, which was also a really good thing to know, that I was going to be required to do a lot of math. And so I should hold on to my passion and excitement for math. Yeah, so I grew up in a science family. My dad was a chemist, a chemistry professor, and my mom had a degree in bacteriology. And so I grew up, I think, just with the scientific language, the scientific way of approaching, thinking about things, a deep respect for nature, evidence. And that totally played into my feeling secure about wanting to be a scientist. Now, it was interesting because for a long time, my dad, when I was younger, my dad didn't explicitly support my interest in science until I got a little bit older. But implicitly, he always wanted one of his children to become a scientist. So he was always kind of hoping one of us did. But he didn't really put the pressure on until he felt like he could actually contribute to that learning. And since he was a professor, I think he felt like not until somebody showed some interest in middle school or high school. So what was interesting is that my mom was more of the support, like in my math, in algebra. I remember my mom was such a great support for me and really helped me understand some key concepts in algebra. And that really helped me love math. I mean, I had loved it before, but algebra, as many people know, can be a deal breaker for people in terms of going into math or not. And my dad, I just remember there were all these well, now I know they were equations, but I remember walking by probably when I was in 6th grade or something and looking and saying, Dad, what are those funny symbols on that piece of paper? Because now I realize they were differential equations, which you don't learn about till college. And he goes, oh, maybe someday you'll learn about those. So he was never one of those people who's like, oh, let me tell you about that right now. Like I've met some parents who were like that for some of my friends or colleagues, where they were very, oh, well, you were interested in this, let me show you now. And he wasn't so much like that until later. And then he totally supported me. He bought me a telescope. He took me to see Halley's Comet. By high school, he was he was then supporting me in wonderful ways. So in high school, my neighbor came over and she said, oh, Laura, you're going into 9th grade. What do you want to do? Are you excited about school? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, do you have any ideas about what you want to do in your life? And I said, yeah, I want to be a physicist. And she kind of, and then she said, well, you don't need to make that decision yet. And I thought, well, I don't need to, but it's what I'm going to do. So I kind of, and that carried me through all the external, kind of difficult moments.